before we get into it, before we get into the Genesis material for the day, are there any general questions? Barrett's? Anything?
I do have, like...
Yes!
Okay, because this has been on my mind since your sermon 2 weeks ago with the, whatever Daniel...
That was the food one, right?
Yeah, whatever they're kind of assimilating, and it's the whole, like...
Kind of assimilating, but not fully assimilating.
Be in the world, but not of the world kind of message. So, I guess it kind of stuck with me because we are homeschoolers, and that's part of why we've chosen that path, so we can like interact with the world how we choose, I guess. But then, like, as you were going through some of the examples, like going to the party when you're in college and stuff like that, I was just like, you know, thinking about my life when I was going through that time and like not so great choices I made, and then what I want for my kids as they're going through that stage in their life. And I was just like, to me that is getting kind of in a slippery slope of like, you know, being at a party where like I have to leave before the cops come. Like, I know that's part of humor too, like, you know.
Well, occasionally there may be some truth to it, but
I'm just saying, like, I've been in that situation, and to me it's easier to get involved in things that you might not ordinarily, so you really have to be a strong person. And especially being a girl, I feel like a lot of times, you know, if they see you as like the goody two-shoes, like they're gonna try to break you even more because it's entertaining for them to see.
Oh, that happens for guys too, because it's more entertaining when people.
And so it's almost like if I could go back and do it over again, I feel like I would have searched harder to find a better crowd to be in, and then try and include people into that crowd as opposed to going to their party or like movies and music and stuff. I feel like the older I've gotten, the more protective I've been of what I consume, because that does affect you. So I don't know, I can see your point of what, like, you're trying to reach people, you're not trying to exclude yourself. And as homeschoolers, that's a very fine line too. Like, we don't want to be like, you know, just exclusive of our little group, and then we never are in the world interacting and affecting other people too. But
yeah, I think I'm pretty confident in this as well. What it takes above all else is a willingness to honestly self-reflect. And like, so here's kind of my prototypical, like my experience at college. So I think in my 4 years of college, I probably went to 2 parties. And the reason I only went to 2 is because I went to the first one, and turns out they're really boring when you're sober. Yeah. So I was like, I don't feel like being bored all night. I'm gonna go do something fun. Which freshman year was play laser tag. I was the 3rd ranked player in the greater Nashville metro area for a year there. And I stopped paying for 5 rounds a weekend. And anyway, that's way beside the point. So what we did is we started doing Friday night movie nights, and anyone was welcome to come, and a lot of people did, but the rule was there was no alcohol at our Friday night movie night. Until we all turned 21, they were like, just be responsible with it. So there's, I get exactly what you're saying, because there is a balance. I think where the self-reflection has to come in is you have to know yourself and whether or not, like, because for me, I'm a contrarian. Like if someone comes up to me and they say, I'm gonna get you to do this, I'm gonna be like, no, and because you said that you're trying, I'm gonna not do it even harder. Okay? And I know that's part of, like, I thrive on that more than I should. So I'm for myself, fairly confident going into situations where there might be a lot of peer pressure. There might be people who are like, well, let's break the pastor. Because I know I'm a punk. But if, like, you have to know yourself, are you good at standing up to people? Do you enjoy standing up to people? What is the relationship dynamic of it? Because if you're going to a party of strangers, that's very different from friends who know where you're at, even if they're in a different place than you are. So I think balancing that in, not of, above all else, is you have to know your own limits and strengths and weaknesses. And that's sometimes hard to be, because no one wants to say, I have kind of weak personality, and if I go there, I'm going to crumble. But sometimes we need to have that honesty with ourselves. Because even with the schooling thing, because they're kind of, in Christian education, there are these two schools of thought of, like, one is very pro-Christian education, and it's, we want to protect our kids. But then there's the other, like, the balancing side of that is we want our kids to know what they're going to interact with once they go out into the world. And we did way back, we did a podcast on this where we brought on Joel Bierman, he's really big on family ministry and how do we raise kids in the faith. And he's like, there's a point where you need that exposure, when that exposure can be helpful, but probably not when kids are forming their foundations. So, especially like elementary, middle school, your personality isn't as solidified. And as we were talking about on the podcast, for like high school is probably the earliest where maybe you're doing intentional exposure to things that we're not necessarily approving of. But it depends on the kid, and it depends on their strength and personality. Because so I went to Vanderbilt, which is a very secular environment, and I went to a public high school that was a very much public, excellent education. I value what I learned there, but again, I am a contrarian. So the whole peer pressure thing has never really worked that much on me because that's my disposition. And as a result, I think I'm a better pastor for it because I've been exposed ad nauseum to a lot. So there was one week when I was down on Vickbridge that both of the pastors were off campus. They were on vacation. So I was the guy, and then there was someone we were helping with rehab who fell off the wagon, and they needed to be picked up from a drug house. And I was like, okay, if you in my car, I'm gonna be really mad at you. And I know I have classmates who wouldn't have been able to handle that because drugs, and I'm like, I don't love it, but I'm gonna get you out of that situation, bring you hopefully to a better place. It was a better place. It was your mom's house, so yeah.
It just really stuck with me because we're making those decisions now as we're going through things, and I feel like it's just something that I'm always self-reflecting as a parent and as their teacher, like, where's that line?
Well, I think that's
good.
good.
We're starting to see, because I did take the stance, and my husband took the stance of, we're gonna protect them through those formative years so they know the right from wrong. So now that they're older, we're starting to see, the library, for example. 60-70% of books you pick up that are new are not appropriate, in all honesty.
So we gotta stick to the classics like Lord of the Rings.
Exactly. Well, I'm just saying, they're coming to me saying, and they're making those decisions for themselves. So I think it's working, and we're doing it.
Yeah.
But
well, and what you said about you're constantly evaluating, I think is where we have to be. Because it's not just I thought about it once and now I know where I sit. Because we're people, we change, we adapt. And the world around us changes and adapts, I guess might be the right word. But yeah, just keep thinking about it. I think as long as you're a little uncomfortable, you're in the right spot. Because if you think you haven't figured it out, then it's okay, that's arrogance. And that doesn't work out. As we'll hear in the sermon this week, when Nebuchadnezzar eats grass like a goat. Sorry, like an ox.
Because the whole time I was just I don't know about this. That was the week of the moose antlers too, so could have been distracted.
I'm really disappointed no one got a picture of me preaching with the moose antlers right behind, because someone from the one side said, oh, it lined up perfectly. I was like, I would have loved a picture of that. A moose pastor. I should have gotten a picture with Bruce with the antlers behind him. Bruce the moose. Anyway. Any other questions before we move into the stuff? Coralie, you have something brewing for me? No? Okay. Maybe next time.
She got all her questions about the car, about the parade and
Oh.
words.
Well, that's good, because I would have had to just check the email. I thought you were only allowed 20 questions. That's the game. All right, so last week, if you'll recall, we were in Genesis 10, and that's essentially Genesis 10 is mostly just a genealogy. But one of the feedback cards that I received was just that lineage records give us the who, what, when, and where. Who, what, when, and where, but not the why. And that happens a lot in the Old Testament. Like, we see exactly what happened, but there's not always an explanation that comes with it. And as tempting as it is sometimes to try and say, this is why, I think we always have to keep in mind that we are speculating. And sometimes our guesses are pretty good, because we can look at everything else God does, and the times that he does explain why he's doing things, and we can say, well, the reason's probably similar to all the other reasons he uses for doing stuff like this. But it is beyond us to say with authority, I know why God was doing this, and he doesn't tell us. So we just need the human. And it's as easy as saying, I think, at the beginning of your sentence, and there you go. Oh, I have 11 pages. I'm just going to see. Not for today. This is the class so far. That's wrong. Sorry, my technology is rebelling against me, which I'm sure none of you is familiar with. Your technology always behaves on the first try, I'm sure. Anyone told me that, I'd say they were lying. Okay, so we're going to be in Genesis 11 today. One of what I think is, I'm going to say this a couple different ways, and please don't take it the wrong way. Okay, first, I think this is one of the more interesting stories in Genesis. The second is, this is one of the accounts that, for me, has always felt mythological. Like it really happened. This is history. I'm not saying it's just a myth, but as I read it, it reminds me a lot of myths that I've studied, like in history class or in stuff like that. It feels very mythological for me, which is cool because this is how God is really working. It's not just a story, but for me, it's like it feels different, and I think part of that is because it's so short. It's just like, this happened. Good luck. So let's read Genesis 11, and to be clear one more time, so no one confuses this. This is a historical account, and Pastor Josh believes this to be a historical account. Okay? No one's confused here. Internet, no one's confused here. Okay, Genesis 11, starting at verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So, as we always do, if you guys just want to start with what questions do you have, what stands out, it makes sense if the Barrett table and the front table, if you guys want to combine, that might be productive conversation because you have a little bit more. But I'm not going to pick you up and move you. I'm just going to strongly encourage the team up. So, yeah, first 9 verses, what questions do you have, what stands out, and then we'll come back in a couple minutes or so.
You know, about the people have the same language and everything else. I mean, we don't speak it right, and still people don't agree on stuff. So how is that? I mean, that can't be the end all be all.
How many cups do you need, bro?
Everywhere that we
It's
sleep.
because they speak the
You want to know
language
who we are? So tell them. We are Tigers.
Everybody always do whatever until you confuse them. Right. That we sit right now, when you think about today, we all speak English, and so you a lot of other.
We all understand what the other new students.
So how is that?
I love
Just
that you
because
brought water,
you disperse them, and give them different language.
Hydration is important.
We didn't bring water anywhere.
Sorry.
I don't see that necessarily the.
Well, no, it's just the language though. They also spread it out to that. Confused so that what's in the collective mind to think through problems.
They know already, because it seems like you're messing up the boat.
So it's supposed to be.
He was. That's trying to mess up the boat.
There's still gonna be dissent, right? People aren't gonna agree.
Apparently,
Some of it, you know, I mean.
One way to get there, I guess.
I'm saying, it looks like the whole there wasn't that much dissent. They were all moving together.
We're supposed to be discussing.
Yes.
Aren't you? See, there we go. We're all speaking the same language. But this just continues.
In the genealogy thing.
Yeah. And it comes over here and says they all have.
So maybe
I see.
this was the history and what they were gonna do after this.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just, yeah, it's just another
Because
one.
we think it's this linear, very linear.
Yeah, because, you know, all through here, each tribe had their own, and then the first thing is now that one, the same word. So it's gotta be who always lived here. Maybe all those languages came after this part, after he spread everybody around.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's just not before.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's a good word. I like it. What was that word you used to? Yeah. What was that?
Bit of money.
See, my translation says total.
Jennifer Harris, while clay was plentiful, processes burning bricks and not using anything until much later. Gentlemen for mortar, use of slime or tar for oil for construction, well described as
So there
yeah, I like the slime.
Not allowed in the back of the.
It's not just a kid's toy, you can use it over and
Yeah, that's right.
We good? All right. What stands out? Or what questions do you have? We can go either direction. Unless we have the Tower of Babel licked.
Okay, so it sounds like everybody at that time, the Tower of Babel, before that one was, everybody spoke the same language and they were all together. But before that, there's all these tribes and they all had their own language. So is that like happened after the Tower of Babel was actually before all the genealogy stuff?
Yes.
Well, I think. Oh,
The time chronologically, the timeline is like that, because in 10:5, says that, it sounds like different languages. So, and then you go back here and it says, no, we're not.
Okay, so I didn't need the other side. I was incorrect. I thought I was going to have to draw something out. So if you go, come on now. So the first 5 books of Scripture were all written after the fact, right? So. Oh, I always get this twisted.
Sort of like Pastor Josh, who all of a sudden thinks there's something different.
Just
and
squirrel.
leads to it, and wait a minute.
And I usually have a point somewhere. Sherry. And there goes my train of thought. So these books are being written after the fact. And they're inspired, and we see this with Daniel too, actually. Because what Daniel does is when Daniel's introducing what he's doing, and it's in the chapter you were talking, in that chapter, in the first chapter actually, where he says, we ate the vegetables, and Daniel and the other Israelites rose to positions of authority in the kingdom. And then he says, until, I think Darius, until whatever other king takes reign. And it's like, well, hold on, because the very next chapter is about their interaction with Nebuchadnezzar. And it's because Daniel's writing this all afterward and he's looking back. So in the beginning, when he's setting up context, he can say, here's what was going on, and we were there for 47 years or whatever. So I think you have the same thing where Abraham's writing this genealogy and where it started, and he says, now all of these, they developed into their own tribes and their own languages. But so these sons, like these people were around, or at least their patriarchs were around for the Tower of Babel, but they hadn't necessarily developed their own tribes and clans yet. That's kind of the editorial as this is being written after Israel's a nation. Does that make sense? Commentary? That might be better than editorial. Whatever.
So it seems like the people at the beginning here, building the Tower of Babel, were a whole lot smarter than the ones at the end after everybody was dispersed. Because they at least worked together.
But that was the point though. God didn't want him to get too smart because then he was afraid they would
Okay, I'm
too
gonna
much bad stuff.
I'm gonna jump right into this one. Is anyone here Irish? Okay, I'm safe then. Okay. So there's a Family Guy cutaway where they go back in time to Ireland before the invention of alcohol, and it's a futuristic city, and there are glass towers and flying cars, and it says, and then a guy runs into the room, guys, look what I just invented, and it's whiskey, and then you just see the whole country collapsing, and they're cavemen again. Maybe that's what happened with Babel. God was like, oh, you guys are doing all right. Oh.
So the point of that would be that he didn't want people to God did not want people to get too smart and work too much together because then they're going to be doing bad things or they're going to hate God or what.
So
The bottom line, in other words.
I don't think the issue is that they were getting too smart or too cohesive or whatever. The issue was they wanted to make themselves as God. So it wasn't their capacity, it was their arrogance. We want to be like God, we want to establish ourselves a place in the heavens, whatever.
Appreciate his creation.
No.
We're gonna make our own.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same issue we saw all the way back in the Garden of Eden. You can be like God, like you can be in charge of this thing. Never in the Bible does God react positively to that kind of thinking. I mean, not this is because I did the sermon prep for this week. This is why it's on my mind. Nebuchadnezzar, he's like, look how great I am, and God's like, go outside, eat grass for 7 periods of time. The Bible does say periods of time. There's no definition of what that means. Anything else? Okay, so I have one flippant comment and then one maybe hopefully helpful question. Can we just agree that English is an unnecessarily complicated language? And if we're gonna ever pick just one for everybody to learn, maybe it shouldn't be English. We have too many exceptions, too many rules that only sometimes apply.
Too many words that are spelled exactly the same. but for-
Right? We're sounded, it's,
They sound the same.
if I am familiar with Spanish, Greek, Hebrew, and English. A little itty bitty bit of German and Portuguese. Of all those languages, I had to pick one, it would be ancient Hebrew. Because it is, here's the philosophy of ancient Hebrew. Throw all the words in the sentence together, we'll figure out what you meant. And I appreciate that. There are so few rules for Hebrew, it's like, just go for it. And then Greek, by contrast, is like, we have 30 rules for every single word you're going to use in a sentence. It's like, why? I've heard Latin is any worse. And I have no desire to learn Latin. Anyway, so there's my flippant comment about how English is harder than it needs to be. My question for you is, are we getting closer to having a united language? Or let me approach this from a different angle. We in this room, do we share one language? Margie's like, I know this is a trap. I know this is a trap.
Except y'all say.
Well, that's part of it. I want you to think of the most stereotypical Gen Z you have ever talked to. Do they ever use words that you're like, I don't think you mean by that word what I mean by that word? We're using the same words. Are we speaking the same language? Not all the time. And so, this is unnecessarily complicated, but I had to read the book, so you're going to get charged for it. There's a book called What Does This Mean by a gentleman named James Phelps. He literally wrote the grammar on learning Greek for the seminary. Very smart language guy. A little bit crazy. He is the only fan I've ever seen get a technical foul at a basketball game. It was a seminary versus seminary basketball game, and he got a technical foul from the stands. This is James Phelps. Anyway, when we are communicating, we have in our head a concept. This is what I want to communicate to the world. And based on that concept, we pick a conceptual signifier. We pick our words, we pick our sentences to try and communicate what we have in our head. But as I hope I'm not the only one who experiences this, it's never exactly like and sometimes it's harder than others, but sometimes it's very hard to pick words that communicate exactly what you have going up on in here. Especially like if, say you're talking with a contractor or someone and you're trying to describe a project you want done, and you have this vision, and then communicating that to them to make it happen is really, so you have, that's where that leads. And then that's just you thinking about it. And then you take your conceptual signifier and you make it into a real signifier, so you talk or you write or you draw or however you are communicating. And sometimes that doesn't land exactly like that because you add in, like if you're speaking, for example, you add in things like body language, like tone of voice, like enunciation, facial expressions. So what you thought you were communicating isn't always what actually comes out. And then you get this, okay, so what's the relationship between the concept and the signifier? Well, it's loose at best, but there's still a relationship there, and then the signifier is received by someone. So I use words, I speak them to you, and then in your head you take those words and build them into a concept of your own, which is not going to be the same concept I started with. And when you're building this conceptual signifier, you're trying to feed in your concept and what you can actually use, and even what you think they're going to receive, but that's not the same thing. So you end up with a just convoluted mess. We can't communicate with each other. You know how much less I would have to do? You know how much less counseling there would be in the world if people could communicate with each other? You would not really want to get a degree in counseling anymore because there wouldn't be enough jobs in it, okay? This. I look at the Tower of Babel and I'm like, we're no closer to solving this conundrum than they were.
Doesn't matter how much alike we are, how many, growing up in the same family, we'll discover this later, raising my children exactly the same, you're all both in the same house at the same time, and they're so totally different.
Yeah.
But we all have different experiences.
You have different experiences.
We interpret them differently.
Yeah, and your mental filter of how you perceive the experience. So, and I had this I was sitting in a floor committee meeting several years ago, and there was a lady, she was a Hispanic lady, and she was really upset because, I don't even remember what the resolution on the floor was. It was something about Hispanic ministry. And she was really upset because she had gone to a Lutheran church and she hadn't felt welcome. And then she explained her experience, and she's like, yeah, I went in, and like, they greeted me and they handed me a bulletin, but that was it. And in my head, I'm like, for me, I would consider myself well greeted. I'm like, well, that was nice. I appreciate the bulletin. And I'd go sit down and find a pew near the back to sit in. Like, that would be the end of it for me. But for her, there was some incredible offense there because she felt like there should be more of a welcoming something going on. Okay? Same exact experience, same exact environment, very different perception based on that. Your culture feeds into it, your family feeds into it, your different experiences feed into it. I need to stop jumping down rabbit holes. There's a concept, have you guys heard the term code switching before? Okay, so the concept is you change how you talk to match the people you're with. And some people are very good at doing this intentionally. The most innocuous example I can give is over COVID, I was an intern down in Florida who were calling all the members of the congregation just to check in. How are you doing? Is there anything like can we deliver some groceries? Like, how can we help? And down in South Florida, there's not much of a regional accent. It's pretty neutral. And I was talking with this is how I talked. And then I get a call from my State Farm agent, who was still from Warner Robins, Georgia. I didn't change my insurance until we moved to California because I knew I was going to be bouncing all over for a while. She asked how I was doing. I said, well, I'm doing just fine. How about you? Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear it. Tell everybody I said hi. And I remember hanging up and I was like, where did the Southern accent come from? Because I code switched without even thinking about it, because she had a deep Southern drawl, so I talked. A less innocuous example, When I worked at Marco's Pizza, I worked with Jodeci in the back. Jodeci had an accent. I copied Jodeci's accent, and I sounded, we'll just say it this way, I sounded a lot less intelligent than I sound when I'm talking to you folks. Because that's how Jodeci talks. So when I was talking with Jodeci, I talked like Jodeci talked. Okay? This can be very helpful because it helps you communicate. It can also sometimes seem disingenuous. Because people are like, well, which one's the real one? It's like, well, don't ask questions you don't want answers to.
We talked a lot about that when I taught school in the inner city. So talking about like how we speak at school without putting down or minimizing how they speak at home.
Yes.
So it's really interesting because you would see it play out in kids all the time. I had a new student come in, and this was like kindergarten, first grade. And he was like, "Miss, what time it be?" And one of the other little girls goes, "It's what time is it?" Like very. So it's like they knew how to speak in school, but then culturally at home they spoke differently. And so we would talk about like school speak or how books talk. So they wouldn't.
Yeah. When I was in college, we heard
It's incorrect.
it's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's where you pick up terms like we use academic English.
Yes.
I mean, and this is true in all sorts of contexts, right? The language I use to write my dissertation is not the same language I use to write a sermon. Because I use a lot of unnecessarily big words in my dissertation that would be a barrier to some people for understanding what I mean. But
When you're having a parent-teacher conference, you're not using all these like.
you don't say, your kid is nuts. You have to say it in a nice way.
Well, I'm saying you don't use that like teacher speak, like he's having trouble with vowels, or they might not know what that is.
Yeah.
Like making sure you're speaking.
In a language that they can understand. Yeah. Well, and even, I am talking with you fine people, you fine ladies, actually, I can say that today. I'm talking with you fine ladies very differently than how I might talk on a Monday night with my guys' small group. Different vocabulary gets used. And we'll leave that right there. The ramifications of the Tower of Babel. So, a couple background notes on this text. Shinar, which is where this is taking place, becomes Babylon. There is a relationship there. There's the word that, it's really close. In English, we say Babel. In Hebrew, Aramaic, I don't remember which one. It's Beth-Eli, which means gate of God. And Babel, so I'll break these out. So on one hand, you have, and that means gate of God. And then on the other hand, you have Babylon, which means the confused. So even kind of how this has been passed down is this transition of you had these audacious claims, you were going to reach the heavens, you were going to become like God, and now you are just the confused. This is a quote that I wrote down from the Tyndale commentary, which is one of the commentaries I look at when I'm getting ready for this. And he made a comment, because a lot of times we look at the Tower of Babel and we say, how could God do this terrible thing of causing all this division and sending everyone apart? And he made this this is the quote. Unity and peace are not ultimate goods. Better division than apostasy. Does that make sense? Do I need to translate? Do I need to code switch? Yeah. So what he is saying, because unity and peace sometimes we hold up as these are great things, and he's saying they're not blanket goods, they're not always good, and they are not the ultimate thing we're striving for. It's not unity and peace. He's saying it is better to be divided than to fall away from God. That's what apostasy means. And there's truth that, like, in our society today, diversity is very much a virtue that we hold up. Diversity, however, is not always good. Because if you have a room full of diverse ideas and they're all bad ideas, then this is not good. Diversity does not help you at all. Like if you're at a convocation of mob bosses and they all have different ideas on how to do racketeering and all the other things that mobs do, this is diversity. It is not good though. So diversity, just like peace, just like unity, these are things that sometimes we hold up because in a lot of places they are really good things. But in some cases, if, for example, if we were to give up the faith for the sake of unity, the Tower of Babel. And it's one of those things where above all else we hold to our God. And that's the comment Tyndall made. I think it's worthwhile thinking about because I think sometimes we do get caught up in some of the things that are good, but we'll call them lesser goods than saving faith. So another interesting comment I saw, and I don't write down where it's from, but I know it's too wise to have come from my brain. Pointed to, so we have the Tower of Babel here. It pointed to Pentecost as a reversal. We have the Tower of Babel that splits everyone up, and then Pentecost, all the languages are spoken together in a way that leads people to faith. So I thought that was a really cool connection. I need to stop breathing down. So the question I have for you guys, where did they go wrong? Why were the folks at the Tower of Babel punished? What part of what they were doing? Because we built skyscrapers. Heck, we've sent people on rockets to the moon, which I imagine is a lot higher than this tower that was being built at Babel.
But they thought they were going to be like God, I guess, or see God face to face, because if they could build it high enough, I guess they thought they could reach the heavens.
So pride,
Yeah.
yeah. Or I guess we can just say the desire to be like God. Which is interesting because we use that same language for discipleship. And what is discipleship? Discipleship is you're trying to be more and more like Jesus. I think it's a different thing. Don't hear me wrong, but we use the same language for both. Anywhere else that went wrong? Maybe bitumen was the problem. It was an unholy mortar. I'm kidding. My brain is a terrifying place to be, I think. And now, just kind of a closing comment on Babel. I think this is one of many, many examples that we get in Scripture where it is a heart issue, not a hands issue. It's not an issue of what they did so much as why they were doing it. And it's the same thing as the story you brought up, I think a couple weeks ago, Ananias and Sapphira from the New Testament, where they give, but they don't give as much as they should have, and they're struck dead, and we say, why? It wasn't so much what they did as where their heart was. And this is something that is remarkably consistent. If you look at how God deals with people in the Old Testament, and you look at how Jesus teaches in the New Testament, why you do things matters as much, if not more, than how you do them or what you do. Both is good. Because, they say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but God's really concerned with our hearts. You see that in David, when David is chosen to be king. God says, I see his character. I see his heart. And you can't see that, but I can, and I want him to be king. You see that when Jesus talks about the Sermon on the Mount, he kind of redefines the law. He says, just because you haven't killed your neighbor doesn't mean you're unclear. If you're harboring anger against them in your heart, you have violated this commandment. Okay? So, we get this example in Babel. I think we maybe even get an earlier example with Cain, when Cain's offering is less acceptable. I think that was a big part of our conversation way back then, is a big part of Cain's issue was that his heart wasn't in the right place when he was making this offering. So, just another example of that. Okay. We have 6 minutes left. I'm going to read this section because it's another genealogy, and I don't think we need to sit with it for too long. So I'll just read through it, and that way next week we can jump into Genesis 12, if that's all right with you guys. The week after next. You are, thank you. I swear, I'd lose my head if it wasn't attached. All right, Genesis 11, verse 10. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And how many times do I have to say this guy's name? And Arpachshad had lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber. And Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg. And Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu. And Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug. And Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor. And Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah. And Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren; she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. The only note I have here is this is Jesus' ancestry, because Jesus traces back to Abram. So now we're making some more links here. Other than that, it's a list of names. I think there are fewer recognizable ones than we had in the last genealogy, other than Abram. Hopefully you recognize Abram, or as he is later known, Abraham. He does pick up that moniker later.
I think it's interesting, it kind of ramps down the number of years they lived after it was 400 there.
That 120-year cap is slowly starting to kick in more and more. Yeah. Man, if you live for 400 years, what would you do with all that time?
I don't know, but stuff's pretty much worn out already.
Maybe it wore out slower. Maybe you got to live for like 100 years feeling like you were 25. And then it started to, I don't know. I'm guessing they probably just worked for hundreds of years. It wasn't a leisurely society. That's a new thing. Any questions? All right, let's pray. If you have anything for your note cards, I would be happy to receive those, whether it's takeaways or questions. Again, no class next week. We will resume, what is that? July 17th, I think, is the next Thursday. So, all right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift you gave us at Pentecost, where we can communicate with one another for the sake of your gospel. We ask that when we are talking with each other, when we're talking with our friends and our neighbors, that whatever is happening with our language, we are witnesses to you and we glorify you in our conversations. Bless us as we go out into the rest of our weeks, that there too we would glorify you. Please be with the parade and the parade float riders tomorrow, that everyone would be safe and have a good time. Bless the 4th of July celebrations here on campus, that again, everyone would be safe and that we would be able to witness to you there in that place and in that time. And above all else, Lord, bring us to a better understanding of who you are and of who you've called us to be. Bring us together again soon, in your name and around your word. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for your time.